after dropping off my 1-year-old and my wife at our apartment. I live and work in Harlem, and was passing a group of young men. The police are estimating around 15 or 20, it seemed like a large group. And I heard, "Get him, Osama," I heard "terrorist." And then I felt somebody grab my beard while on a bike, hit my chin. And what ensued was punching until I was ultimately on the ground. In terms of injuries, I'm very thankful that 3 bystanders intervened and stopped any further damage. My lower jaw is fractured and was wired yesterday by a oral surgeon. But as you can see, I'm here talking to you today. I'm very thankful that it wasn't any worse. I'd also like to say, in terms of the actual event itself and its aftermath, I've been working with the NYPD hate crimes unit, and they've been handling this as seems like a priority, and really appreciate their professionalism and support. What happens to the people that did this is in their hands, and I think it's worth for myself and at least my family to focus on other things. First, I just want to mention that I've lived in Harlem for 2.5 years, New York City for 10 years, lived in multiple places. My parents came from Indianapolis here today. And it's really not the Harlem that I've gotten to know in the last few years through our community work, and it's really not the face of our community. And when something like this happens, whether it's myself or to anybody else, I think it's critical to see that this is really not the community that we expect, certainly not the country that we expect. And yet, we still have these bias attacks, bias-related crimes. Last year, I wrote in the New York Times about tracking hate crimes almost as an academic. And this year, I feel very differently. Certainly after Saturday, I feel a deep amount of empathy for all the other people who've experienced things like this, whether or not it makes the news. Certainly for children that are bullied in schools and playgrounds, and certainly for the other woman, a Muslim who was attacked very shortly thereafter, which the NYPD is also looking into whether or not that's related. I sat next to her 2 beds down in the emergency department and got to know a little bit about her story, and feel badly as one physician would for anybody that was in that position, and certainly as a fellow person. I'm speaking today, and why we brought this together, with 2 goals in mind. One is to get back to the work that I think is so important, to looking at what a healthier community actually means in a substantive way at the community level, as we've been working on with a number of institutions around the city, with the Harlem community, to really understand and work on what a healthier community looks like and means. That work's dearly important to me, and as soon as possible, I'd like to get back to it and plan on seeing patients tomorrow. The second reason is that I know there's a lot of interest in speaking to me and hearing about various angles on this, and I wanted to make sure that there was a consolidated focus for discussion, so that myself, my family, and the community can get back to doing the work which I think is ultimately should be the focus of preventing events like this in the future. And finally, I just want to express an enormous degree of love and support for the attacks in Westgate in Nairobi. It's where my parents were born. It's where my family, where we grew up, and my extended family lives minutes away from Westgate. And some of my colleagues were there on Saturday, and it's just incredible to hear, and I want to just share from myself, certainly, just a deep degree of love and support for what's happening in Nairobi and Kenya now. Thank you. I'm 20 years old. My father used to always tell me in Nairobi and Kenya, whenever you saw a man in a turban and a beard, a sardar as they're called, you knew you could just call for help. You could ask them to do anything. You could ask them to move groceries for you, or if there was an attacker on the street or anything. I hope that in, hopefully not 20 years, but over the next few decades or few years, we can move to a point where you see a person in a turban and a beard and the exact opposite reaction emerges of fear, and recognize that turban and beard sitting next to you on a plane may be your first line of defense, the first person to jump into a line of trouble for you, as we have done in the military across the world, here in the United States, and just on a regular person-to-person level in our communities. I think that's a core teaching. You see this face and look for help. That's what we're here to do. My sense is that they would be under a bit of duress if I was talking to them at the moment. I think it's probably pretty pointless to ask what was going through their minds. Really not anything worth really conveying. I think I would ask them if they had any questions. If they, knew what they were doing, if they, and maybe a bit of welcome. Invite them to the Gurdwara where we worship, get to know who we are, and then share it with their friends. These are tight social networks. Everybody knows everybody. And so, make sure that they have an opportunity to move past this as well.
And so I would say this, that what happened 2 days ago to Dr. Singh did not happen in a vacuum. Now it's 12 years after 9/11, and yet I still find myself having to explain that I was born and raised in this country. I played Little League Baseball. My mother was a soccer mom. I'm a die-hard New York Yankees fan. I'm an American. Those conversations still have to happen. And so when I say this did not happen in a vacuum, consider this. In the last year, a Sikh motorist driving with his 13-year-old son was shot in a drive-by shooting in a random act of hate of what police locally in Sarasota, California, Florida called a hate crime. In Fresno, California, in the past year, an 81-year-old Sikh gentleman was beaten with steel pipes outside a Sikh house of worship in Fresno. In Washington, Seattle, Washington, in the last year, a Sikh cab driver was brutally beaten by a man yelling ethnic and racial epithets. The ones Prabhjot Singh, Dr. Prabhjot Singh heard 2 days ago, Osama, bin Laden, terrorist. In the last 2 weeks, in Chicago, a Sikh sitting in a restaurant was punched directly on his turban by an angry patron. Here in this city, in New York City, on Wall Street, a Sikh walking, just simply walking, like Dr. Prabhjot Singh, had his turban knocked off by someone. It did not happen in a vacuum. Now, 2 weeks ago, we released a report about school bullying here in the city. It's called One Step Forward and Half a Step Back. It's about the bullying of our children here in New York City and Asian American school children. What we found in our report, and this is fresh data, is that over 50% of the kids in our community suffer bias-based bullying. They're called bin Laden, they're called terrorists, they're called Taliban. Over 20% as a price of maintaining their Sikh identity suffer violence beyond bullying on the basis of their Sikh identity. So my take-home message is that what happened is it did not happen in a vacuum, and I'll conclude by saying this. There is a combination of poor public policy, crude media stereotypes, and little education in our schools that led to what happened to Dr. Prabhjot Singh and what's happening in the Sikh community. So take, for example,